and players mob him.
But Michael Jordan is not only the best basketball player, but he's the most exciting basketball player to ever play.
Tatum fires away, pumps it in, 51 for Jason Tatum.
The Big Three NBA podcast is powered by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official wagering partner of the CLNS Media Network.
Hey folks, welcome to another edition of the Big Three NBA podcast with your host, Sherrod Blakely, and I'm joined by my good friend from back in the day, Alex Kennedy. Woo! You think I have a lot of job titles. Let me go through the Alex Kennedy Rolodex here. Let's see. We've got Chief Content Officer with Basketball News. We've got ESPN contributor, and he's also the host of Running Up the Score podcast, which is a definite one you need to check out on all your podcasting apps and give it a good listen to. Good content there. Alex, welcome to the show, my friend. How you doing?
Thank you for having me. I'm doing really well. Great guests on Running Up the Score, too, like yours truly tonight, which is dropping at 6 p.m. Eastern time. So, you know, if you hate me, come for the guests. That's what I got to say. But it is always good to hang out with you, buddy, even if it's over Zoom. So, yeah, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And I just want to kind of just cannonball our way into the show here and really get into some of the big issues throughout the league. And I think one of the big surprises thus far has been what's happening out west. When you look at the top of the West standings, you almost think like, is this the top teams in the West or is this the top teams playing for the play-in game, which is where you normally find Minnesota, which is where you normally will find in Oklahoma City. What's your take on the success that those teams that have, you know, in recent years have been pretty mediocre to bad? What's your take on them taking over and being able to be, you know, kind of the leaders of the pack out west so far?
Yeah, it's been so impressive. I think last year I was really high on Minnesota entering the season. And I think actually at Basketball News, a lot of our staff, we were really kind of pushing the Minnesota agenda. But I think we were just 1 year early on this team. You know, Anthony Edwards looks incredible. You know, Rudy Gobert is playing really well. I think their defense has just been so impressive. And, you know, they look like a legitimate contender, which is crazy because it is a significant jump for them. But yeah, I mean, whenever that trade happened, obviously the Gobert trade, obviously there were tons of jokes about the return and, oh, this just screwed up the value for all of their star players. And that was kind of the conversation. And then after last season, people were thinking, oh, this might go down as, you know, one of the worst trades in recent memory. Now it's not looking quite so bad with how well they're playing and how the pieces are fitting together. So I've been really impressed with this Wolves team. The fact that they're number one in the West right now is a huge surprise to me. You know, I thought they'd be better this year. I didn't think they'd be this much better. And then OKC, I've been a huge fan of theirs since the start, you know, for a while now. But entering the season on my show, we kind of picked our big surprises entering the year, which team would, you know, surpass all expectations. And I picked OKC because, as we kind of talked about on my show, I feel like the narrative around this team is always the draft picks. It's, oh, they have 8 first-round picks over the next 6 years or whatever the numbers are. And everyone kind of focuses on the future and what they could be, or, oh, they should make a big trade. They have all these assets. But there hasn't been enough attention on this group, which is a super talented group. Even if they didn't have any picks over the next couple years, we'd be talking about this Thunder team as a scary group that could become a really scary contender over the next couple years. Their team is that good and that well-rounded. So I love this Thunder squad. I think they're really, really fun to watch. You know, it's not even just 1 or 2 guys, you know, they're a pretty deep group and they're going to be much better 2-3 years from now. You know, obviously the money aspect of things has to be factored in with the new CBA, especially, and the fact that OKC's never been a team that's really willing to pay the luxury tax, but that's where all those picks come in. They can keep cycling through and having, you know, more young guys on rookie scale deals kind of come in and step in and fill that void if certain guys leave in free agency. But yeah, I think if they can keep this core together, they're going to be scary for years to come. And I just think they're a really fun team to watch too. You know, SGA, Chet, J-Dub, it's a really fun group. So yeah, I've been loving it. I think everyone kind of going into this year talked about Denver, the Lakers, the Clippers, the Kings, even after what they did last year. To see Minnesota and OKC, 2 smaller markets too, which is really fun for those fan bases to see them kind of rise to the top. It's been a really cool story.
Yeah, the Timberwolves has been, for me, the bigger surprise, only because Not so much the Rudy Gobert trade and its impact, but to me, the level in which that they have allowed Anthony Edwards to be the face of the franchise and how Cat has taken a backseat to that, which was necessary. I was concerned that Cat would put up a little bit more of a fight, but Cat being Cat, he didn't put up much of a fight. When Anthony Edwards was clearly the alpha of this team, clearly the guy that has, frankly, embraced the reality that we're not very good and you don't think we're very good, but I'm going to show you we're pretty damn good. And I'm going to show it on a night in, night out basis. He's not getting nearly as much, I think, conversational talk about league MVP as I think he deserves. But again, for most players who are making that ascension into that conversation, you usually don't get the buzz until like a year after you probably should have gotten the
Right.
buzz. And so he's definitely on track in that regard. But the one thing we do know with absolute certainty at this point is Anthony Edwards will be part of All-Star Weekend in some capacity. I just don't see a reality or a planet or an existence that doesn't have him in that regard. Now, the same cannot be said for a guy that I know our Celtics listeners are clamoring to be part of the All-Star Game festivities is Derrick White. Derrick has had a great season. He's been one of their best players in the clutch, literally. Has done pretty much all you would want from a guy who's your fourth or fifth option. Uh, what's your take on just his all-star candidacy, which seems to be gaining some momentum as we get closer and closer to that ultimate decision being made by the coaches?
Yeah, I love the fact that he has so much support and he's getting recognition because he has been playing so well. He's a fun guy, a fun player to root for, just with his contributions and his ability to impact the game on both ends of the floor and his hustle plays and just everything. I think it's great that we're seeing his name mentioned and he's getting a lot of love because he deserves it. He should be getting his flowers. As far as the All-Star conversation or whether he'll make it, I just think there's too many great guards in the Eastern Conference. So it's going to be tough for him. Now, I will say this. I think coaches should reward guys like this to show their other players. You would think they'd want to make an example of a Derrick White and say, look, you can make an all-star team as the fourth or fifth option on a team. I used to say this back in the day whenever Jamal Crawford had that, I forget what year it was, but he had a great season where he was in the mix for an all-star position, even though he was coming off the bench. And my thought was you would think the coaches would want to reward Crawford because they can, kind of show their other players, look, if you sacrifice and are willing to come off the bench, you can still make an all-star team and you can still get the kind of accolades that you want. So I wouldn't be surprised if coaches, vote with him. Even though you would think they would do that, I will say, though, in past years when I've thought coaches might make an example out of someone and show, look, you can make an all-star in this kind of role, they haven't really stepped up and done that. They don't really vote that way. So if he has a shot, it would be because the coaches want to kind of make that point. And then also, you mentioned it on my show, but if Boston is just winning so many games, you look at the teams that have had 4 all-stars in the last 2 decades. It's been teams that have the number 1 seed, number 1 record in the NBA by a significant margin. And it's like, okay, this team is just so good that we need to reward them by having 3 or 4 all-stars. So I think that's also a factor. But if you look at the guards in the Eastern Conference, it's Tyrese Halliburton, Damian Lillard, Trae Young, Donovan Mitchell, Tyrese Maxey, Jalen Brunson. LaMelo Ball was 7th in the fan vote, but he's obviously injured. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of really good guards out there. So it might take for White to get in, it might take like an injury replacement situation or something like that. But personally, I am rooting for him. I do hope he makes it because, again, I'm a big fan of his game. I think he's contributing to winning, and that's really what it's all about at the end of the day. And he's a really fun player to watch. So I would love to see him get in. It's tough when you read off those guards, and then also the fact that the player vote factors in too. I think players, based on what we've seen in recent years with the player vote, they tend to go after notable names, big numbers. So that might be working against them as well.
Yeah. The player vote in many respects resembles the fan vote, which I find a little bit disturbing because you're literally giving guys who you play against more credit than they probably deserve. I mean, if you're voting for like a James Harden, over if you were in the East, you voted for James Harden over like a Derrick White, for example. I might question that vote because ultimately, is it about stats or is it about winning? And if it's about stats, it really shouldn't just be about stats, but often
Yeah.
that's what it comes down to. Coaches tend to look at more of impact on winning. Are those stats impacting winning? And Derrick White has a very, I think, strong case to be selected by the coaches as a reserve, no question about it. But to your point, you mentioned how some teams historically in the past have had 4 All-Stars, and those are teams that have been really awesome. The Celtics have 4 legitimate All-Star candidates when you talk about Tatum, Brown, Porzingis, and Derrick White. Realistically, Tatum is pretty much a lock. He's going to
Yeah.
get it. But from the other 2, we'll look at Brown and Porzingis because I'm not sure both of those guys are necessarily going to get in. What's your take on those 2, and what do you think the chances of one or both of those guys getting in?
I think both will get in. If I had to say, which one I would kind of prioritize over the other, I think it would be Brown. And I think, again, I think Jaylen Brown is probably going to get more player votes than Porzingis. He's ahead
He
in
is
the
on the
fan
players'
vote.
board, so that
Yeah, that helps too. Yeah,
help.
exactly. I think he's a bigger name, more notable name. Porzingis, obviously, he had his unicorn days and things like that. But I think if you're asking players, hey, who should be representing the Eastern Conference, Jalen's gonna be pretty high on that list. And we see in the fan vote, he's number 5. He got 426,000 votes. Porzingis had 197,000. He's 8th. So there's only 3 spots in between them, but that's a pretty big gap in terms of votes. So I think he'd be ahead in terms of the fan vote and the player vote. And even the coaches might go Jalen. I think Porzingis might have a better shot with the coaches, just because of his 2-way impact, how tough he is to guard, things like that. But I think Jalen would probably be higher if I had to guess. So, but I think both guys can make it. There is a chance. The front court spots, there's definitely some scary names at the top that are going to be locks for sure. But then after Tatum, really, you look at Jimmy Butler, we mentioned Jalen, Bam, Mikal Bridges, and then Porzingis. I don't think anyone's worried about Kyle Kuzma. You could make the argument that Paolo Banchero in Orlando, is on the verge of making an all-star team. But if I had to guess, he's probably 1 year away. So yeah, I think there's a chance that both of these guys could make it. I think 3 All-Stars for Boston is definitely a realistic outcome. I think 4 is where it gets kind of tough. And to your point, it would just have to be they're winning so many games that, and maybe there's a couple injuries. Like we said, if there's an injury replacement situation and Derrick White can kind of jump a few guys in this list, then maybe they will have 4. But I think 3 is probably the most realistic outcome.
Absolutely.
Score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and so much more. So visit FanDuel.com/Boston and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL.
We're here with Alex Kennedy, of the host of the Running Up the Score podcast. We're talking about the NBA, Boston Celtics, All-Stars, and you touched on a guy who's on the team that I wanted to talk about, and that's the Orlando Magic. It was just maybe felt like a couple weeks ago where they were looking like, damn, kind of like Minnesota OKC of the East. Team that was kind of near the back of the pack, but now they're rolling with the big dogs. They've hit a little bit of turbulence lately. What's your take on that team and just whether this is just a minor setback or is this just kind of them settling into where they're probably going to be this year?
Yeah, I think whenever they were playing that well early this season, I was surprised. They were definitely ahead of schedule. They're one of the youngest teams in the NBA. And they're just a team that is still missing some key pieces. You look at, they're a team that doesn't have any shooting really, or much shooting. They attempt the fewest threes in the NBA, and they shoot one of the worst 3-point percentages in the NBA. The spacing isn't there. Now, I feel like I'm being overly negative. This is a really fun group with great with great motor. I mean, a great motor. They hustle every single play. Jamal Mosley has instilled an incredible culture there where he has these young players playing phenomenal defense. And that's hard to do. Sometimes it takes, young players a couple years where they're playing defense, hard every single play. But they're a really frustrating team to play against. They have a bunch of pests. They're going to at times pick you up full court. Jalen Suggs, I think is climbing that list of like most annoying opponents if you ask a lot of players in the NBA, because he is all over you. He's firing the crowd up. He kind of has like some of that Patrick Beverly type energy to him, where he's going to get under your skin, and then the fans are going to go nuts when he's diving for loose balls and getting into little altercations. So they're a really scrappy, physical, long group. So I think that's why they're winning so many games. And for a while there, they were shooting the ball pretty well. Paolo was shooting like 43% from three. They had some guys like, Gary Harris that were stepping up and knocking down some threes. And Franz Wagner was shooting decent at times. But I think whenever you can win some games when you're playing that way, but at the end of the day, if you can't shoot the ball in today's NBA, it's going to really hurt you, and you're going to come back down to earth. And I think that's what we've been seeing. We also have seen this is the toughest stretch of their schedule all season long. They've always been a team that was better at home than on the road. We've seen them lose some of these road games, and they're playing good teams. They lost 2 games to Boston, who prior to that, they had won 4 straight against the Celtics. And, I talked to Jaylen Brown about that, and he was like, they're a physical team. They're long. He said they're really unconventional and really tough to prepare for. So I think that's a testament to kind of what this group can be when they're playing their best basketball. But then again, losing to Boston on the road, losing to Milwaukee on the road, they lost to Philadelphia. They lost to Phoenix on the road. They just lost to Sacramento on the road. Like, there's definitely a trend here. When this team goes on the road, they struggle. They definitely play better at home, especially offensively. It seems like on their defense is there night after night. Offensively, they're much worse on the road. And so I think a lot of people were looking at this stretch of the schedule as kind of like a litmus test for this team. Like, can they go on the road against good teams and continue to play at this level? And they really have been able to do that. They've won 3 games since December 15th. So, I mean, they've really dropped quite a few games here. And it doesn't get much easier. They're about to play Denver on the road tonight. Then they play Minnesota. Then they play Miami, OKC, New York. I mean, Philadelphia. There's a lot of tough games that are coming up. So I do think that part of it was they were playing better offensively, and they had quite a few home games there. And that's the next step for this team. They have to become more consistent. And I talked to Paolo about this last year or earlier this year. He admitted that the travel and kind of adjusting to the schedule has been the biggest thing for him. And that, you go from dominating in college and high school and, being the best player all your life. 82-game schedule is hard for these guys, even the top prospects. They're not used to that kind of travel and, everything that kind of comes with that. And so he mentioned he worked on that over the offseason and really tried to kind of get used to it and prepare his body and be less fatigued. And he didn't want to hit like a wall in the second half of the year. But you're seeing once again that he's struggling, and the team overall is struggling with road games, and especially against good teams. So yeah, I think this team is going to be okay. They have a really solid core. Again, they have a great culture. I love Jamal Mosley. For a while there, he was getting, coach of the year love. Obviously, they've fallen back down to earth, but I think the next steps of this team are to get some playoff experience and then go add some shooting so they can have better shooting and spacing next season.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to like about Orlando's future when you start looking at the pieces that they have now and the fact that they're so young and they're still learning a lot. The one guy that has just been I've found myself really wanting him to be the player that I thought he was going to be when he came out of college, and that's Jonathan Isaac. I know he's on the minutes restriction thing, but man, I mean, you talk about maximizing the minutes you get. I mean, he's basically playing fit, getting you basically 5, 6, 7 points, 5, 6 rebounds, a block here and there in about 15 minutes. And he makes a clear impact. Is there any shot that there's going to be an incremental increase in his minutes, or are we looking at basically 15 to 20 minutes from him the rest of the way?
I think they're probably they're gonna be really careful with him. Had he not got injured again last season, they might have ramped him up, but he got hurt again, and everyone was so excited. I was there for that first game back, and he hadn't played in 3 years, and the team was all rooting for him, and he had a great game. Defensively, he was all over the place, blocking shots, getting steals. He was knocking down threes, and last year he actually shot 40% from three, and that was a really encouraging sign for people in the organization. It's like, oh, maybe he could be a two-way threat for us. Then he gets injured again, and it was a significant injury. So I think that scared some people. And it's like, okay, maybe we pushed him too hard. He just had so many of these injuries now, and a lot of them are like little freak injuries. So I think they do want to really limit his minutes. And then this year, he's really struggled to shoot the ball. He's shooting 27% from three, and so to go from 40% last year to 27 this year, I mean, it's been rough for him. So I think that's part of it too. That's kind of affecting his minutes, where you get the defensive intensity and blocks, and they definitely use him in certain matchups. Like whenever Denver came through, they threw him on Jokic for a little bit, and also threw him on Aaron Gordon. Like, he's that kind of guy where you can guard multiple positions, so you can kind of throw him out there and kind of go at the hot hand. But I think the fact that he's not shooting the ball as well, and the offensive contributions aren't there, they kind of use him in these spurts defensively, and then bring in someone else for offensive firepower. If he can get back to the point where he's shooting, even 36, 37% from three, and just as a threat from 3-point range, and can show over, a full season or a season and a half, look, I can play significant minutes and not get injured. Maybe they do start to trust him again in that way, but I've seen they've benched him for back-to-backs too, like quite a few back-to-backs. So they're just being super cautious, I think. And hopefully, that goes away, and he can kind of stay healthy for a longer period, because he is a very exciting player, and he's kind of perfect for today's NBA. Like, when his 3-point shot is falling, you want a guy that can go out there and be swarming defenders, block shots, get steals, and then go knock down threes. Like, that's every team's dream these days. I just think the 3-point shot is him in there, and then obviously the injuries have them being super cautious.
Yeah, because I mean, you just look at his physical makeup and just his mental makeup as far as how he approaches the game, what he's trying to do out there. He's the perfect fit for this generation of a defender who can get you buckets and do a lot of those things. No question about it. Any conversation about the NBA and the regular season and the playoffs would never be complete if you don't talk about the Lakers, no matter how good or bad they're playing, because they're the Lakers. I believe they're in the play-in zone-ish range right now.
Yep.
LeBron is continues to do LeBron things, which is just maddening 20 plus seasons into the game that he's still able to play at the level that he has. But when you look at some of the issues that have come together for them to struggle, how they have of late, what are some of the issues that jump out to you about the Lakers' struggles of late?
I think they've just been really struggling to not only knock down shots, but they've had some injuries here and there. I think they're also trying to figure out the best rotation. We've seen them kind of cycle through a number of different options as far as the rotation goes. And I hate the fact that Darvin Ham is getting so much of the blame. I saw there was a report, I think it was yesterday, that, he's losing the locker room and they're frustrated about the rotations. And I think the energy feels a little bit different. This team has kind of went through tough stretches before, and it seemed like they were, they came out the other side and everything was okay. Now it seems like Darvin Ham's getting quite a bit of the blame, and there's been criticism and, some shots fired and things like that. So I don't know. I feel bad for Darvin Ham there. But it's not completely undeserved. I will say that, there are some issues with rotation, and I can understand some of the frustration. Like, if you go on Twitter during a Lakers game, just the comments about Ham from Lakers fans, they're very frustrated. And this team just hasn't been the same since like that in-season tournament championship. I'm not blaming that, but this team looks different, and I don't know why that is, but they look like a much worse team. And to fall from, where they were higher in the Western Conference, now 10th, it's been pretty rough for them. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of crazy when you look at a team that has Anthony Davis putting up crazy numbers, 25, 12, 3 assists, 3 blocks, 1.5 steals. LeBron, to your point, has been just playing like LeBron. He looks like himself, which is crazy. It's wild how consistent he has been. And just the hustle plays and the energy too. Like during that in-season championship and some of the games around that, he was out there making plays that, you would expect from like a 25-year-old, just the hustle and the effort. So yeah, I mean, to go from that and have these kind of star level players and be struggling like this, anytime that kind of is happening, I think the coach is going to get some of the blame. And I think Darvin's a super nice guy. It's a tough position when you're a Lakers coach, because when things go wrong, there is so much criticism. There's more Laker fans than, any other fan base. You just mentioned, even when they're struggling, we talk about them, and that's all media. So when a team is struggling and you're the Lakers coach, there's a huge target on your back. And it's not just Darvin Ham. We've seen it with other coaches in recent years. I mean, Frank Vogel dealt with that at times. And it's just a constant if you're in that situation. There's definitely perks to taking that job, but that's one of the cons. You're going to be in the line of fire if there's issues with the team. So yeah, I think they can still turn things around. They have the talent, obviously. I also think some of the young guys that have gotten opportunities lately, like Cam Reddish, Max Christie, they've shown something. So maybe we'll see more of them. I know fans are calling for more Austin Reeves. He's playing less than 30 minutes per game, and I know fans want to see him starting or more involved. I wouldn't be surprised if they turn to him more. That's one of the gripes that fans have with Ham, that he's not turning to Reeves. But yeah, I think they'll be okay. They have the talent. And I'm just not that scared. Like, if you look at the Western Conference standings, there's a pretty significant drop off when you get to, let's see, I'm gonna pull it up right here. Like, after Sacramento, if you told me New Orleans is going to, fall down the standings, or I think New Orleans and Dallas, let's put them in the pack, even though they're a tier below the top 5 teams. Houston, I don't think they're going to, continue to play this well. Phoenix, obviously, they're going to come up, but like Golden State, Utah, Memphis, I don't know. I think that they're definitely going to make the playoffs. I'll say that about the Lakers. And then what they can do with it, that remains to be seen. But like, I look at the Lakers and Suns, and I would not be surprised if by the end of the season they're higher in the standings than where they are now. And that team like Memphis too, with Ja Morant back now, they're going to climb a bit too. But yeah, I think Phoenix and LA, they're better than their record indicates. I'll say that.
Yeah, with Memphis, that was my surprise team this year, but that was obviously thinking that Marcus Smart would be healthy for that full 25 game stretch that Ja was out, and he wasn't. So they're definitely another team. With the Lakers, to me, the interesting thing is that if they get to the playoffs, which I agree with you, Alex, I think they will. I don't know if I am, let's say, in Oklahoma City, if I want to see them in the first round. I don't know if I'm Minnesota, I want to see them in the first round, because seeing LeBron on the opposite side of the floor in the playoffs doesn't make me feel comfort. Doesn't bring comfort to my life. Does not make me feel happy, joy, and goodwill to all men. No, it makes me kind of scared. Because we've seen LeBron do some pretty amazing things, and even though he's on the north side of 20 years in the league, he's still LeBron, and he's still pretty damn good. The one thing about the Lakers, though, and again, I don't know how to tangibly explain this, but the fact that this is becoming more of Anthony Davis's team, part of me feels that's why they're not that good. Because we've seen Anthony put up amazing numbers in New Orleans. Clearly that guy. And they didn't win. And here we're seeing LeBron kind of force feeding Anthony Davis the team, which makes sense, because LeBron knows as well as we do, he's an incredibly talented player. But I'm still not getting the sense of where his leadership skills are. I don't get a feel for whether, when times are rough, is he one of the guys that's kind of galvanizing the troops and bringing them together and saying, we got to snap out of this? Even, just a completely different scenario. But in Boston, you look at Tatum, you look at Brown, but when they were starting to make a comeback against Oklahoma City and the camera pans to the sideline, you got Derrick White talking to guys. You got, Al Horford talking to guys. You had multiple guys who were showing clear and undeniable leadership. And LeBron, his leadership is unquestioned. He's that guy in that regard, among many things. But who else is speaking up when things go a little squirrely for the Lakers?
That's a great point. And I think one thing I've seen people mention online too is you have, not only do you have a lack of leaders there, but then that's, I think, amplified even more when you have a first-time head coach in Darvin Ham, and he has no former head coaches on his staff. It's all up-and-coming coaches, assistant coaches. No one that really has that experience either. And so, to your point, if LeBron's the only leader on the team, and you have I feel bad kind of going at Darvin Ham, but he is a first-time head coach with no former head coaches on his staff. That's a fact. So Yeah, I mean, that is definitely an issue. And I think also just LeBron knows this stage of his career. He needs to lean on other players throughout 82-game season so he can be ready in the playoffs. And I think that's why there was so much excitement about Austin Reeves coming into the year, because we saw what he did with Team USA. He's put up numbers before. The playoff run was, really impressive. And so the thought was, oh, he could really be someone that helps take the load off LeBron and put up big numbers. Right after that Team USA run, he was the favorite for most improved player entering the season. People thought there was going to be a big Austin Reeves jump, and then it hasn't been there. The minutes haven't been there like fans want. So yeah, I mean, I don't think this team should turn around and make a trade. I know a lot of people are calling for like Zach LaVine or some kind of trade. I think it's understandable because last year at the deadline is when they really turned their season around with that big midseason shakeup. So fans are like, oh, let's just do that again. But that's really rare. I think continuity is very underrated in the NBA. The chemistry is very underrated. And if you make those kind of midseason shakeups every year, granted, they could work sometimes. You saw it last year, but I don't know if just kind of, going all in on one of these big star players like LaVine or Siakam and sacrificing depth, and especially LaVine, like his contract is so crazy. And I think that's why we haven't seen him traded yet. There's teams out there that are kind of scared about LaVine, and they're not sure that his stats and personal accolades can contribute to winning. And then you're paying him $43 million a year, and it's only going to increase in the coming years. So yeah, I don't know. I don't think a trade is really the answer. I think they have to figure it out with this current group.
Yeah, absolutely. And the point that you mentioned here about Darvin Ham and coaching, and full disclosure, I know Darvin going all the way back to his Detroit days when he was on that championship squad. We've had many conversations about.
He's a great guy.
He really is. He really is. But to your point, you really do, when you're starting off, you benefit greatly from having some experienced voices on that bench with you. That being said, and we'll end it on this note. Who would you say has done the best coaching job in the NBA thus far this year? Because there's a pretty good number of candidates you can make a case for.
I think I have to go with Joe Mazzulla. I'm not just saying that, to try to pander to your audience. I don't know. I mean, I've just been so impressed with the Celtics team. The fact that they can do it on both ends of the floor. The fact that I think they're the only team in the NBA that's top 3 in offensive rating and defensive rating. They are 15-1 when they have their starting lineup. Granted, he has a great roster, and nowadays we do see that, a lot of times coach of the year or, it tends to go to teams that have overachieved. And I know I mentioned earlier, Jamal Mosley was the front runner at one point because everyone's like, where did this Orlando team come from? So I don't know. There's been, we've seen that in recent years where like overachievers have gotten the award, but I'm just so impressed with what Mazzulla has done and just the Celtics team. I guess I'll say that I'm more impressed with the Celtics have done. You can speak to Mazzulla and his strengths and weaknesses better than I could, to be completely honest. But I would reward the top seeded team that just is. I think Boston is better than every other team in the league by such a wide margin that I would give it to him. It's almost like your argument of why Derrick White might get an all-star berth, because they've just been the best team by so much. I give Mazzulla credit for that. He got a lot of criticism last year and Celtics fans were frustrated. But this Celtics team looks great. So I might name him. Who would you say? And what's the perception of Celtics fan? Because your noise when I said Mazzulla's name was funny. What's the perception?
It's mixed with Joe. I think there's a segment that's warming to him and thinks he's a good coach, and there's another segment that thinks that this dude is just too young and too he doesn't make those critical in the moment decisions that work out, that you look back and think like, damn, that was a great call by Joe in that moment. He doesn't make enough of those, I think, for some fans. I would say for me, and this only goes back to, I just thought that he was the wrong guy, and he clearly is not the wrong guy. And that's Chris Finch in Minnesota. There is no way in the world that the Timber Pups, which is what I've called them forever, because they were always like these cute little puppies that were just kind of scrapping and hoping that they could someday get out of the lottery. And now they got the best record in the Western Conference. He's done a great job. Whatever they have done to convince Cat that this is his team, and you are an incredibly talented, super good secondary piece. And Rudy, defend, do what you've done in Utah. And no, we're not going to get you a bunch more touches like you want. You need to defend. That's how you're going to give us value. His ability to get everyone to understand their role and execute that role, and just, again, be the best team in the Western Conference. That's hard to do. particularly when you don't have a roster that on its merit puts you in that category. Like when I watched him play, I feel like every time I watched him play and they win, they're overachieving. And at some point, you have to give them credit for not overachieving, but they're just actually playing good basketball. So Chris would be my guy. Joe,
Yeah.
Joe's in my top three because I think he's done a heck of a job. I think and for someone who has seen him both from the time that he took the job to where he's at now, there's tremendous growth. He's gotten so much better. And they played Oklahoma City. And there was a moment, in the second half where Joe had to make a decision that I thought he'd never make. Drew Holiday was not having a very good game. And rather than sub Drew in when he normally would, he kept Peyton Pritchard out there, who was playing better. And recognizing I wouldn't say the hot hand, but just the better player in that moment, that's growth for Joe, because there are too many times, and it's part of the criticism, he leans on guys who aren't playing well and sits guys who are playing well. I can't even tell you how many times Sam Hauser has been cooking, and then Sam's doing the same thing I'm doing, watching the game from the sideline. I'm like, but this dude is like 4 for 4 in like 14 minutes, and he's sitting? What are we doing? So those are the little things that Joe, I think, is gradually getting better at, and definitely deserves, at a worst case scenario, to be a top 3 finisher. But I can understand a case for him. Chris Finch is the guy that I would pick, though.
Finch was the other one that I was looking at, just because they've not only are they number 1 in the West, but they have been in one of those overachiever teams that typically get rewarded in this conversation. So yeah, Finch deserves a ton of credit. And again, last year, this Minnesota team, people were making jokes about the trade and thinking, oh, they need to blow it up. So to go from that to what they're achieving right now, it is super impressive. So yeah, Finch, I would say those are like my 1 and 2, Mazzulla and Finch.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, super impressive having you on the show, Alex. I appreciate your time. This is the Big 3 NBA podcast. I'm your host, Sherrod Blakely, with our special guest today, Alex Kennedy of Running Up the Score podcast, as well as ESPN contributor and chief content officer with Basketball News. Alex, thank you so much for your time, my friend. I appreciate it.
Anytime. Thanks for having me, buddy.